Continuing, we have African architecture. There's a diversity of techniques used in their architecture, and of course, the techniques and materials would reflect the climate of the region in which the architecture was structured, and of course, again, the people. They used mud brick, rammed earth, wood, thatch, grasses, bamboo, raffia, and animal skin. Stone is unusual, that should be stone. Tents, huts, and palaces were created, and could have been used for housing or religious uh, practices or for government. The Shona people of southern Zimbabwe again will be the stone house. The Shona is a term that came in use in the 19th century. They were a people in the plateau south of the Zambezi River. Today, that would be Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Mozambique. Located in the savannah, so they're not united politically, economically, or even culturally, and they were never even really a single people. They were nomads, and they did do some settling in the Iron Age. So the Great Zimbabwe Kingdom was from the 11th to 15th century. The Great Zimbabwe, or Stone House. It's the largest ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa, and it could have been a judicial center or royal palace. They're not exactly sure of the function of the Great Stone House. There are three main sections. The hill ruin, which is the oldest, and that's the picture that you have in your reproduction. There was the great enclosure, huge wall, and then valley ruins. They had granite walls, stone floors. There were some platforms and mud buildings. It was connected to a cave. Now, the uh, great enclosure was finished 100 years after the hill ruin, and it would have been finished before 1450 CE. Um, the exterior wall is intact, and at some places it's 20 feet high. The north and western section is 20 feet high, and then on the southern and eastern sides it's 32 feet high. It's pretty impressive. There were various walls and structures also built between the hill ruin and the great enclosure. Dry stone masonry was used, no mortar, so just piled on top of one each other. And it was thought that perhaps it was a defensive wall, but it doesn't enclose everything. And there were also some curves to it that really weren't that important, and also seems playful at times. The work is very fine work. The outer wall is rougher. Most of it's intact, but the wooden lintels have deteriorated. So in places like the doors or gates, they seem to deteriorate a little more than others. The granite is exfoliated because it has been exposed to um, the weather, and that granite breaks apart under climate. The granite would have been exposed to 6 months of rain and then 6 months of dry, so obviously it will be affected by that. And at first, people just picked the granite up off the ground to use. Later, they had to actually go and quarry the materials, and then to have it match what they used initially, they had to artificially create the weathering. So they would heat it up and douse it with water to imitate it and then get some of the same effects that were already of the stone already used. So again, creating natural weather conditions. And the one thing about it is because of this weathering, it causes the mica in the granite to sparkle and glow. So it does kind of give this really beautiful effect. Now inside the great enclosure, it's 292 feet in diameter. There are some smaller areas within it. There are some uh, sections that have conical homes, and of course the conical roofs, which would have been made of thatch. There were some carved soapstone sculptures, mainly birds, and eagles and raptors would have been symbols for the kings. And there was a tower constructed that was 30 feet in height. It is conical, so it represents perhaps a grain bin. Keep in mind that rulers received tributes in the form of grain. And of course, they would store that and then give grain to visitors or to the poor. So this could have been a symbol of the royalty and, of course, their power. People have to give you tributes, but then also their generosity, helping out the poor. Inside, there would be some stepped platforms called chikuvas or stands. And this is where wives would display their pottery at home. So these two things, when you have these stands and then these conical shapes, they're going to represent towers and platforms, represent male, female, state, and family. So very symbolic. Again, not all the purposes are clear. Was it for a royal court? But as the population increased, they more grounds were needed, so they would expand out. More buildings were made. This is a human assertion over nature, but it's done with respect. So it's not like they destroyed nature; they kind of blended it in. Remember, did connect to a cave. All materials came from the site, so it is human made, but the forms incorporated natural formations. The Shona believed that the dead continue to be a living and protective presence, and their ancestors of the royalty were still responsible for providing for the people. So the land belonged to the ancestors. The leader just is holding the land in trust during his lifetime. And the Great Zimbabwe is a visual demonstration of the ruler's power and responsibility to the people. So he may be living there, but this was all created by the people before him. I remember part of the African religion is that people continue to live, they only are actually gone when people forget them. So as long as you have kind of these things still built by ancestors and you remember them, they continue to live on. All right, music in African art and culture. It's an integral part, very important part of their social gatherings and religious activities. Music is just a part of everyday life for them. It could be entertainment, it's in every aspect of their culture. It can be performed with the body through signing, stomping, or clapping. And of course, they have a wide variety of instruments. And it depends upon the region. Flutes, whistles, horns, rattles, gongs, bells, harps, drums. And they would be decorated. And the decorations may also add to the sound of the instrument. And the decorations may also have traditional and symbolic meaning. So now I'm going to talk about the Nubian people. So this is going to be part of northern Sudan. Notice it's going to say Upper Nubia and Lower Nubia. You would think that would be the opposite, but no. So again, this part, the Nubian people lived in present-day Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. It's one of the oldest civilizations. Again, two parts, lower and upper. And the culture would have been centered on the Nile. So the upper is going to be highland. That's why it's upper, because it was actually above. And then the lower region in northern, and it's along, of course, the river. The borders now coincide with the border of Egypt and Sudan. And 90%, 96% of this region was desert. So, ooh, great place to choose. So, of course, they needed the flooding of the Nile. That was very, very important to them. This was considered the gateway to Africa because it was the only routes across the Saharan desert to the Mediterranean Sea. And the Nubians then would trade with Egyptians and Greeks and Romans and the Near East. So a very complex society because they would have access and interactions with all these other peoples. Nubian and Egyptians alternated dominating the cultures. It was Egyptians and it was Nubians and it was Egyptians. So Egyptian art often would depict Nubian rulers. Nubians would be very recognizable. They had their own symbols of kinship in their clothing, jewelry, and short hairstyles. Egyptians would depict themselves with red brown skin for men, yellow for women, whereas the Nubians would be darker brown or black. Nubian also had its own architecture, funeral rites, and their own gods. Many had to relocate with the construction of the Aswan Dam in the 1960s to 70s as the region became flooded. Many moved to northern Egypt, but the ethnic group still continues in its storytelling, music, and literature. So here we have a lyre or a kisar. This is from Nubia in southern Sudan. It's late 19th century. It's in a British museum. It was owned by a singer and spiritual healer. So again, we know who owned it, but we don't necessarily know who made it. The artist was not that important. It would be a lead instrument in a small ensemble. There would be tambourine and a drum, mainly used at weddings and other life ceremonies such as harvests or for the Tsar cult. Musicians were mainly men, but in the Tsar cult, the audience mainly women. Here, the Tsar cult, where they have the little festivals, there were healing rituals for women. They would seek to commune with their spirits because they believed Tsar spirits would take possession of a woman's body. So when they had these particular rituals, this allowed women to behave in ways normally society would not agree with and also address issues perhaps not normally spoken. So this was really a chance to kind of get whatever was bothering you off your chest. So I could see an important thing for women to do. The rituals still continue, although today they use electric lyres. This particular one would be 16 inches high, 45 wide, 47 inches in depth. It has a wooden form. This is a skin soundboard with holes in it. Wooden arms are extending up at a 45-degree angle. Third of the way up, we see this strap of braided red cotton, and then, of course, two bars up at the top. Strings of gut were tied to it, this iron ring that's in the middle of these two holes. It's decorated with cloth, glass beads, and have all these suspended elements. Some of them are recognizable. There were coins from the Sudan in Arabic. Some were from 1899. Three of the coins are British 1861, and you can see Queen Victoria on them. Some of the other coins are from 1832, and some cowrie shells. There are also some wooden prayer rosaries, a Quranic amulet, a keyhole plate, so the thing where you put the keyhole in, and perhaps even a trigger mechanism for a gun. So some very interesting items hanging on this. Very diverse objects, but this is also showing the movement of the Sudanese people and the faiths that they would encounter. This is considered an anthropomorphic object, almost human-like, has some human characteristics, right? These would be the eyes, the nose, these outstretched arms. And while you're playing it, it would have a voice. The owners perceived that each instrument had its own spirit. So these would be jealously guarded again by the owners. And again, all of these suspended elements tell stories because they may have been items that were given as an offering, or perhaps this is a way of payment for performing at a particular ritual. So all of these elements also become a detailed history. Okay, and that's it for now.